Oh, there we go. Recording. Get a little worried now because earlier in the week, I was moving some stuff around and it actually scratched the front of the screen. So it looked like there's this huge chip just right in the front. There's only one way to really summarize my reaction on that. I love these little things. It's like a face cookie they do at the grocery store I go to once in a while. They do like Big Bird, Elmo, and Cookie Monster, and all they had was Oscar. It really summarizes how I've been this week. So a few days ago, I saw Captain Underpants in theaters, and that's probably just the best way to put it. I saw it in theaters. Um, and even though it's only been like, I guess, 2 days since I seen it, it was difficult to pick out what movie to close out June on, considering how there were some choices, but ones that I probably were like, best to wait as a rental. I mean, for starters, the reviews of The Mummy literally scared me away from it. I was gonna do one on it, but it was like, the review's a little too harsh, and I'm hearing too many negative things about it, so it's kind of best to just keep away from it. And I don't want to see Cars 3. I just have no interest at all. Same thing with Transformers 5. It's like, After the fourth one, it gets stale. But no, I read these books when I was young. I loved the world to them. I think they're very cleverly unique novels, even as I look back upon them. So I figured, might as well check it out, see how it holds up. And the bottom general critical line with this movie is that it's silly. It's incredibly silly, but hilarious. Like, this is pretty much weird science if it was written by the people who did The Amazing World of Gumball. That is pretty much the movie in a nutshell. It is crazy insane, and despite the limited 35 million, I think it was, it's considered the lowest budgeted of all the DreamWorks movies. It's just a really funny movie, and I'm surprised that it's not getting a lot of attention. It's just sort of there. I'm glad it made some kind of a profit. I think it's like at 65 million or 70 million the last I checked. But no, this is just a relatively all around good movie. And if you haven't read the books, the basic skinny is that these two very mischievous students pull all these pranks around the high school and stuff because they're kids and stuff. And one of the things they like to do is create comic books. And one of them is this superhero that wears nothing but tighty whities and a cape, and he has superpowers and he flies around. And it's a very jokey comic. It's made for laughs and stuff, and they like doing these creative things and also pulling these pranks on the side. Not because they're mean kids, it's because the school they live in has all these very dull teachers and stuff. That's something I think they address more in the books as opposed to the movie. I think that's something they address more in the movie as opposed to the books. The fact that the school they go to is a very dull, very, formation, it's better to be formative than being creative kind of place, and they try to liven up with their little childish sort of pranks. And they're not really mean-spirited. They're kind of like Dennis the Menace in a sense, even though some of the mischievous stuff is a little questioned at times. I mean, there is one point where I think like a bunch of we're talking about a moment where they're doing like a montage of all the pranks they did, and one of them involves like the bubbler exploding to a giant water fountain or something like that. And so their principal, plans to split them up, and after this huge prank, he actually has proof of them doing it. They hypnotize him with this little toy ring that one of the kids has, and he becomes the superhero that they've created, and a bunch of chaos ensues. And I think in terms of how they adapted the source material, because this is, DreamWorks, and the track record for DreamWorks, I want to say has been kind of mediocre so far. The last movie I can remember I actually saw from them was Home, and it was on Netflix. I mean, The Cruise is pretty good, but Home, that was one where like the potential was there, but so much stuff just went not good. Um, and so for them to take on this film, it's sort of appropriate for their aesthetic because if they gave it to like Pixar or someone else, they would probably want to water down a good bulk of like the toilet humor and stuff. Um, but no, it's all there. Like I said, it's pretty much along the lines of say uh, Rugrats, Gumball in a sense. It's just really silly, really out there. It's very self meta. There's a lot of jokes that are really, really good. Um, there's this. Well, let me get an idea of how absurd this movie is. We're talking about an entire sequence where, and this is like something out of the book, only they changed around a bit, where the principal in his superhero form is told, let's make the place more fun and everything. And so he hires on a big carnival, and of course, a lot of stuff happens. Like he drives a bus through like flaming hoops and stuff. Um, there's a scene where earlier when he captures like footage of the kids with this little turtle, one of the kids Melvin invents. It's like the Tattle Turtle 2000, and there's like a little matey cam of the turtle. And there's a bit where the George and Harold are trying to get the turtle, and big cliche, the turtle is with the principal the whole time. He just lifts up his leg looking for this kids, and the turtle's like taped to his leg and stuff. He's like, "Oh yes, I bring it everywhere with me, even in the shower." And then it cuts to a close up of the turtle, and you see a little tear come down, and he has a frown. We're talking about a movie so silly. It will address real world issues in like the shortest amount of time. There's a bit where the villain Professor Poopy Pants, played by Nick Kroll, gets like big, and he picks up the school like it's a little tic tac, and he goes, "Oh, look at the tiny little school with all the tiny little students and the tiny little teachers with their tiny little salaries that can't help them afford through life." Like, wow, good way to put that to the kids. I just love movies like this. I love really absurd stuff. I like crazy things as long as it amounts to something. That's why. Hold on. But no, I like stuff like Gremlins, where it's just like really out there, crazy. Well, then again, Gremlins is a good example. I'd say something like One Crazy Summer, where it's just really wall to wall absurdity, and it doesn't really care how much like it's breaking the sense of reality and all that sort of stuff. Um, and there's certain like jokes and stuff that kind of felt like that. I grew up on things like Rocko's Modern Life and Courage the Cowardly Dog, where it's just this whole other environment and universe where these crazy things are happening. And sometimes there's a sense to it, and sometimes there isn't a logical sense to it. And I think the low budget really helps. Because for this kind of cartoony aesthetic, it doesn't need to be like really polished or look, close to human as possible, like, Shrek, for example. This is something like the Peanuts movie, where if you just bring it to the aesthetic of the original comic strip or the cartoon, it'll look fine, because it's set in its own universe. It's a trademark and style of, the characters and the author and the illustrator. So just pinning it in, that world, it really meets, it really sets the tone and style of the film itself. So it's not like trying to make them like real people or anything. That'd be ridiculous. I heard for a long time the author David Pikely didn't sell the rights because he always felt like there were more stories to be made, and he wanted to let go at a certain point and kind of close it off. And I think waiting this long, it definitely helps, because usually some movies tend to be made while book series are still being made. Harry Potter for one, Game of Thrones. I mean, hell, because they brought Jon Snow back to life. You're kind of wondering how they're going to do that in George R. R. Martin's books. Where else at Harry Potter, they were making the movies like when the books were still being made. I think like when the fourth one was being made, there were still like 3 or 2. I could be right or wrong. And I think the fact that so much time has passed, and there's like 11 or 12 books already out. It's interesting because they're able to take like so much material and just expand around and just do something original with it. And I think here what they did was they just took like a certain selection of books, crammed it into one film, and just did around with that. Um, they do take elements from other books. There's a little bit of the fifth one in there when they discuss about the origins of Captain Underpants in comic form and certain things here and there. But other than that, there's definitely some material they put in there that's kind of new and different, that's sort of changed up a little bit, mostly for plot reasons. And unlike stuff like the Lorax, where it feels like, padding, here, it works well to its advantage. It does open up a lot of, character moments, which don't feel too brief, but definitely feel essential to the plot. The whole entire time, these two students, have the fear that they're not going to be friends anymore if they're separate, and so they don't realize until the very end, oh, if we're in separate classes, we can still meet up and stuff after school. Like, it takes them that long to realize it, because, when you're that young, you don't realize things. You kind of see, like, the bigger picture and how much disastrous it can be. It's like the Adventures of Pete and Pete. The small stuff you really focus on because you're not old enough to understand the bigger picture of things and the bigger scope of stuff. You're just sort of very narrow-minded and thinking, oh, it's going to lead to this disaster and all this sort of stuff. And that leads to a pretty good gag, too, where they fantasize themselves as sock puppets. And they just see each other at the mall, just not friended anymore. And then robots appear, and I think it's Harold that's like, wait a minute, what are robots doing? No, it's George that's like, wait a minute, what are robots doing here? Don't look at me, it's the future, there's always robots. It gets out of hand. But even in just doing silly stuff like that, you're kind of laughing because you can picture this from the mindset of the kid, the fact that they're taking the smaller things in such a serious manner, and yet when the bigger stuff do happen, don't get, it's not like, awful things happen, but when you really feel like that their world is coming to an end, you really feel that, like when they're put in different classes and stuff like that, and when there's certain moments where they're in true peril, you really feel like they're in peril. You really feel like they're not going to get out of this moment, and when they find a way to get around it, it's like, oh, what a relief. I was definitely a little worried about the voice actors they got for this film, considering how they have adults playing the kids, like Kevin Hart plays one of them. So it's kind of weird because I always like the idea of kids voicing kids because it really helps the aesthetic and the mindset of what they're thinking, all that sort of stuff. And it's kind of weird hearing an adult voice in the body of the kid. They did that with like Taylor Swift and Zac Efron and the Lorax. I probably shouldn't talk about that one. That's the only example I can think of just off the top of my head. But here I think it works. I think because their voices are able to like really get into that kid quality and stuff, and there's that hyper tension to it, you really don't mind it that much. You really kind of get used to it, and you can kind of excuse it because of how crazy and insane this world is. I do wonder what it would have been like if they did go for like younger voice actors, but here it's an exception. You sort of kind of get used to it, even though I do admit that's kind of a problem on the film's part. Because it's just so weird hearing, these middle-aged comedians voicing these two small kids. But then again, they do the same thing with, like, the Melvin character, who's pretty much this nerdy geek who's, like, the ultimate tattletale, and, I don't get the joke. The others, they do fine. They do fine. Ed Helms plays the principal. And again, I was really worried because Ed Helms has done The Hangover and, I don't want to say it, The Lorax. But here, he's actually pretty good. He really is very versatile between playing these two different roles. The very uptight, tense principal, the very open-minded alter ego that he's hypnotized into. I just like the idea that on one side, he's this very closed-minded person that's sort of, like, very antisocial, but all about, conformity and everything. And yet, when he turns into Captain Underpants, he becomes, like, this kid, this basic big kid that's kind of understanding things and stuff. And they do play around with that. They really show like this fun-loving nature and how he's so open to everything. The Actually, no, they do play around with that because I was gonna nitpick because in the books they do mention the fact that because he's Captain Underpants, clothes is like his kryptonite or something. No, he doesn't like putting clothes on because that's not part of his superhero thing. And here they do play around with the fact that once in a while he just randomly like removes his pants because he's Captain Underpants. He doesn't. That's not part of his thing and stuff. He's the tidy whitey superhero. He's not wearing stuff. So I can kind of sort of excuse it for that. But even then, the books kind of explain that it's like I don't want to say it's part of his kryptonite. I don't want to be like right or wrong on that, but I don't want to even get into that aspect. It could get too Freudian. Nick Kroll, I was also worried about. We're talking about someone who played a feminine hygiene product in Sausage Party. Hey bros, but again, I'm really surprised to see how well he fits in here. He does like this really German. He has like this German accented voice for this professor, and again, it surprisingly fits in a weird way. For those who don't know, he plays this professor that invents like this shrink and growth ray, and it could solve many problems, solve many things. The only problem is that because his name is so goofy to say, everybody can't take it seriously. And I'm going to admit, as a kid reading the books, I mispronounced it a lot. I always thought it was Professor Poppy Pants. It's actually pronounced Professor Poopy Pants. And it's funny the way they changed around the dynamic between the book and the movie. In the book, he gets his revenge by forcing people to change their name with these giant billboards and stuff to make them silly. If you're gonna laugh at my name, I'm gonna give you a silly name so people can laugh at. And here they changed up a bit for more drastic dynamic plot. He plans to remove laughter from children so no one will laugh at his name, and in that aesthetic form for the movie, it works. It really does work. Because you have the addressment of how important comedy is, and how people can't take things seriously sometimes, or something so, damaging to them, they won't be able to take this matter really seriously. And it works perfect in the dilemma when you have your two main characters that have, laughter as their biggest weapon. Comedy is their biggest thing, and this one guy is trying to literally take all the fun just because of how he feels so offended by how much he's been mistreated with the most simplest of silliest of things. It definitely works for this kind of movie, especially considering how, it's meant to be like this, a family picture, but with toilet humor. But even the toilet humor doesn't feel that enforced. It's there, but it's not like, an eye-rolling kind of thing. It's done, well. It does its little bit and then just moves on with the plot. It doesn't focus on it 100% of the time. And there are moments where it does feel essential to the plot, like, silly names and stuff like that. But it works. It surprisingly works. We're talking about a movie where the climax involves a giant robotic toilet. What more do you want from me? And there's even parts of the book they do work in perfect ways. The Flip-O-Rama, they put that in there, and that works pretty well. The next sequence is too graphic and even too expensive for a movie like that, so we're actually doing this little flip book thingy right here, and that works pretty well. There's, again, some minor to small stuff they do toss in there. Instead of the mean, grumpy cafeteria ladies, it's replaced with one named Edith, and she supposedly has this crush on the principal. And that also surprisingly works. It definitely, edges on, Crump's lifestyle, and, it adds on to why he's such a grump and a stinge. And you do really kind of sympathize with him, because in the books, all I remember him from being was this very mean, evil principal, because, teachers being evil because they're trying to instruct the information. And here, they're really trying to put in some sympathy, and it works really, really well. Because instead of, saying, oh, he's just, a mean old principal, no, they really do subtly address that there's reasons why he is this way. There's a sequence where George and Harold look around his house and they see like this very plain, very ordinary life, and they kind of connect the dots together and realize that he's such an that he's not a very social grump. Um, that's probably why he acts this way. And even then, the bigger dilemma is raised when, if they turn him back into the principal, he's gonna literally separate their butts, and they're not gonna see each other again. Blah blah blah. But yet, when he's under Captain Underpants, that is pretty much not. That's pretty much not what's gonna happen. But yet, at the same time, because he has such a wild mind, he'll do crazy things. And at the same time, they don't want him to do these crazy things because it could cause like so much havoc and damage. Even they set up that earlier when he's like running around the town, like fighting mimes and throwing old ladies into trees because their cats are in the tree. Don't worry, I'll get you closer to the cat. She just wanted to be closer to her cat in the tree. That makes sense. It's just a really fun, wholesome film. If you have kids, this is definitely worth seeing. If you don't have any, this is still worth seeing. It's just a really silly movie, and you really got to turn your brain off for this one. It's very meta, very out there. But if you like stuff, again, like Amazing World of Gumball, or hell, even Wayne's World, it's pretty much like that, only for a much more younger audience. But even the stuff they do, they surprisingly get away with, and there's a lot of stuff for the adults to at least keep them, entertained. The only thing I can think of that might turn people off is maybe the juvenile humor and the pottiness, the potty humor, and the fact that it is going for that younger crowd doing these things. But I really didn't feel that. I felt like it was just a John Hughes movie for kids. There's elements that do work for adults and elements that do work for kids, so there is that kind of double-edged sword to it. So I'd say, if it's still in theaters, check it out and get the chance. It's only like 90 minutes long. I mean, what are you really going to go see? Cars 3? Despicable Me 3? I'm probably going to get dragged to that one by my mother because she loves the Minions. Transformers 5? Hell, if you're going to go sneak into Transformers, just order a ticket for Captain Underpants and sneak into like another movie if you want to. But no, this movie's doing well at the box office, and if they do a sequel, I'll be open to it. Hell, if they do, I'd like to see them do the second novel, because that's my favorite one. Because that involves the talking toilet, the evil talking toilets. I don't know why that one was my favorite. I think it's because of the fact that they're just... How can you take something so inanimate and make it so despicably scary? It's just a toy with, like, googly eyes sticking out of the seat and sharp teeth and things running around going, yum, yum, eat 'em up and eating people left and right. It's amazing. And they have them in there near the end. It's a nice little cliffhanger cameo that kind of works to its advantage. So yeah, if you're a fan of the books, you'll be fine. It's a solid, serviceable adaptation. And if you haven't read the books, but just really like juvenile, absurd kind of stuff, you'll get your kicks here. That's really all I got. Tra-la-la, tra-la-la, and I'll see you in June.